Before you make your next best ball pick, or even your first one of this entire season, you're going to want to hear this. I recently studied the top 300 teams over the last 3 years on drafters.com main best ball tournaments. And I found some nuggets that are juicier than my wife's bottomless mimosas at her Mother's Day brunch. Draft slot matters more than you think. The winning roster construction is surprisingly consistent, and that whole 2 quarterback versus 3 quarterback debate, well, we finally have a line in the sand. Stick around, because I'm dropping nothing but gold today. Let's roll. There is arguably no better feeling in fantasy football than when you land an absolute steal. You get my 2025 Fantasy Football Draft Dominator, which is jam-packed with strategy and analysis for 250-plus players. And he's been strong in fantasy football. He's averaging over 18 fantasy points per game over 25 career games where he's played at least 73% of the offensive snaps. 2025 Week Winner, formerly known as the Heat Map. So you can conquer start-sit dilemmas, find plug-and-play streamers, and dominate your weekly matchups with this one-of-a-kind resource, Discord community, where you can get personalized advice from 180-plus and counting sharp fantasy football minds that are helping each other dominate. 365 days of elite fantasy football analysis, resources, and Discord community. What's up, my friend? Thank you for tuning into episode 56 of Inside the 20 by Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. I'm your host and the guy who quit a decade-long corporate sales career to foolishly build a small business from scratch and chase a childhood dream, Mikey Henninger. I've made over 4,000 fantasy football draft picks for the 2025 season across 200 plus and counting best ball leagues already this year. And it's May 20th, 2025. Over 4,000 draft picks already this year. That is the type of volume where if you name a player, I can tell you exactly what round they are currently being drafted in 2025 fantasy football leagues. In fact, I can do it in my sleep. I have done it in my sleep. Just ask my wife. But more importantly, this is the type of volume where I can tell you exactly when to pounce and exactly when to pivot, which is why this type of volume is what makes my 2025 Draft Dominator so dang dominant. Candidly, when you're using the Draft Dominator, you're going to crush your competition before the first football is even kicked in September because you're not only drafting the right players, but you're drafting them at the right time. Just drop the word Dominator in the comments below if you want more information and I'll get in touch. But today, I'm combining all of that hands-on experience, all of that 4,000 plus and counting draft picks with a brand new data-driven deep dive to help you dominate the 2025 best ball season. You see, I recently studied the top 300 teams over the last 3 years on drafters.com main best ball tournaments. And I found some nuggets that are juicier than my wife's bottomless mimosas at her Mother's Day brunch. We're going to dive into which draft spots historically tend to overperform or underperform. We're going to dive into which roster constructions are most commonly found among winning teams. We're going to dive into when smart drafters tend to pivot from a 2 quarterback build to a 3 quarterback build. And ultimately, we're going to dive into what this all means for you in your 2025 best ball drafts. And honestly, everything that we're about to discuss today isn't even scratching the surface of the gold nuggets that I've already found, I've already dropped inside my fantasy football Discord community. Just drop Discord in the comments below if you want more information on how to join that Discord community. And by the way, before we begin, one quick caveat that you need to know is that all of the data we're about to discuss is specific to drafters.com, but candidly, many of these findings could easily apply to other platforms as well. It's just that drafters.com is my platform of choice for best ball because your full season roster actually matters, actually scores points, every single week. There's no playoffs, there's no eliminations, nothing like that. Every single week matters. It's by far my favorite platform for basketball, and candidly, it's not even close. I genuinely don't even bother with the other platforms. I left a link for you below to try it out if you'd like to. Use promo code BBFF when you sign up, and you will get a 100% match on your first deposit up to $100. It's like getting free money to play fantasy football with. And if you really want to test your skills, I personally am inviting you to join my listeners only best ball contest. Use that promo code BBFF when you join, and not only will you get that 100% match on your first deposit up to $100, but you're also entitled to $10 off an annual subscription to my small but mighty business, Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. Drop the words best ball in the comments below if you want more information, but without further ado, let's head down to the fantasy football field. Like the chicken wings on Hot Ones that ruined Maya Rudolph's entire day, let's kick this thing off with something spicy that you can't control. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, you have to find that clip. It is hilarious. But we're going to start this thing off with something that feels like it shouldn't matter, but just might, even though you have zero control over it. We're going to talk about your draft spot. Now, interestingly enough, a whopping 20% of the top 300 teams over the last 3 years drafted specifically from the number 4 spot in a 12-team draft on drafters.com. Next up, 13% of the top 300 drafted from the 5 spot and 12% drafted from the 3 spot. In other words, 45% of the top 300 teams over the last 3 years came from picks 3, 4, or 5. That's almost half. That's almost half of the entire field coming from just 25% of the draft board. Meanwhile, interestingly enough, the 1.01 and the 1.02, the draft picks that everybody usually drools over, those each only produced 5% of the top 300 teams. Of course, plenty of that data is probably skewed by the fact that Christian McCaffrey was largely drafted first overall in 2024, and we know how that story unfolded. But even still, over the last 3 years, even the 11 spot and the 12 spot, those draft spots that mostly everybody cries over, have outperformed the 1 spot and the 2 spot over the last 3 years, producing 17% of the top 300. Now, can you control your draft spot? Of course not. Is this a guaranteed edge? Definitely not. But if you find yourself drafting from the 3, 4, or 5 spot this year, then maybe just sit up a little bit straighter and get a little bit more excited, because you might just have yourself a seat at the winner's table. Use it wisely. Speaking of winning, as I do every single month, I am giving away a signed NFL jersey to one lucky winner, one lucky BBFF member this month here in May. In January, we had a fantasy football contest for the duration of the NFL playoffs. Brian Beaver emerged victorious and took home an autographed Drew Brees and T. Higgins jersey. In February, we did a Super Bowl predictions pool. The winner of that is Seahawks fan Isaac Zart, who chose a retro Seahawks blue Jackson Smith and Jigba jersey signed by JSN himself. In March, Mark Vanderloo won our March Madness Brackets contest. He is a Greatest Show on Turf Rams fan, and he chose an old school Rams jersey autographed by the Rams all-time leading receiver himself, Isaac Bruce. In April, we had an NFL mock draft contest. The winner of that was Brandon Peterson, who chose an Alvin Kamara jersey. I've given away Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, Earl Campbell, Amon Green, and 2 different Jamar Chase jerseys, all within the last 12 months. I give away 1 autographed NFL jersey every single month, and if you want in on our next giveaway, just drop the word jersey in the comments below and I'll get in touch with more details. Now look, I have been playing best ball for more than a decade. I'm borderline obsessed with it. It's by far my favorite format of fantasy football. And what I have found over the years is that winning in best ball is arguably more about the way you construct your roster than it is about the players themselves that you pick. So let's talk end game. Let's talk about how these elite teams in this 300 team data set were built. Let's talk roster construction, including the most dominant roster construction by far that has a Grand Canyon size margin over any other type of roster construction. Across all 300 teams in the top 300 on drafters over the last 3 years, the most common roster construction by far by the end of 20 rounds was 3 quarterbacks, 6 running backs, 8 wide receivers, and 3 tight ends. Let me say it one more time. 3 quarterbacks, 6 running backs, 8 wide receivers, and 3 tight ends. A whopping 28% of the top 300 teams finished their drafts with this exact build, and no other combination registered even as much as 16% of the top 300 teams. So while that 3-6-8-3 build came in at 28%, the next closest most common combination was a 2-6-9-3 build, registering 15% of the top 300 teams. After that, it was a 3-5-9-3 build that came in at 10%, and a 2-7-8-3 build that came in at 8%. Any other possible combination came in at less than 5% of the top 300 teams on drafters over the last 3 years. Now, is following a 3-6-8-3 build a foolproof path to victory? Of course not. It's not that easy. There are definitely exceptions to the rule and areas where you don't want to follow that build. But is this a terrific guideline, a terrific starting point that historically sets you up for success better than any other possible roster combination? Absolutely. So remember, your roster construction matters just as much, if not more, than the players themselves that you draft. And winning teams, by the way, are rarely weird. They're rarely drafted in a way that's strange. They follow consistent, proven patterns. And if you want to be in the money in 2025 best ball, then you should too. And by the way, part of what I've done when splicing and dicing all of this data is building somewhat of a model that helps you determine which roster construction you should follow based on your previous draft picks. Meaning, if you took X amount of running backs or Y amount of wide receivers in the first 5, 6, 7, 8 rounds, I can give you an idea of what build you want to end your final draft with based on what you've already done in the draft. Just type the word model in the comments below if you want more information on getting access to that. So having briefly discussed what the end of your draft should look like, let's zoom in on the beginning of your draft. Let's zoom in on rounds 1 to 4, where champions and losers tend to be born. Now, for starters, be aware that a whopping 73% of the top 300 teams over the last 3 years chose a wide receiver with their first pick in round 1. And after 2 rounds, 43% of the top 300 teams had 1 running back and 1 receiver, and 40% of the top 300 teams had 2 wide receivers. In other words, after 2 rounds, a whopping 92% of the top 300 teams had at least 1 wide receiver on their roster after the first 2 rounds. That's more reliable than your pickup truck from 1994. And by the end of round 4, by the way, while no other roster combination accounted for even so much as 19% of the top 300 teams, a dominant 30% of the top 300 teams had started their roster construction with 1 running back and 3 wide receivers, which gives the hero RB philosophy plenty of legs and plenty of data to back it up. It's just something for you to keep in mind the next time you think about going RB to start your draft in the first 2 rounds. Don't get cute. Don't go chasing nostalgia running backs the way TLC chases waterfalls. History says that your safest path to glory is to make sure you're prioritizing wide receivers early and often, especially in PPR leagues, which is what you get on drafters.com. Now, it's time for the eternal best ball debate. Should you go with 2 or 3 quarterbacks? Well, here's what the data says. Are you a software wizard? A code ninja? A forge master? Or maybe even just a mad scientist? Then come build your career ladder with Infinity Labs, an award-winning technology company, best place to work, and business of the year with best-in-class benefits and compensation. Visit i-labs.tech. That's i-labs.tech today, where you can learn more about Infinity Labs, our expanding national presence, and why the status quo has no hold on us. If you draft your QB1 in round 4 or earlier, you're probably safe going with 2 total quarterbacks by the end of the draft. In fact, 60% of the 83 teams who drafted their first quarterback within the first 4 rounds, those guys stuck with 2 quarterbacks. And that trend, by the way, that holds pretty steady through round 7. There's still a slight lean towards sticking with 2 quarterbacks after 7 rounds if you've drafted your first quarterback in round 7 or earlier. But once you wait until round 8 or later to take your first quarterback, that's where things flip into 3 quarterback territory, which inherently makes a lot of sense. Because at this point of the draft, you're typically betting on lower floors, lower ceilings, more variance, and you're trying to offset that increase in variance with a larger selection of quarterback options on your roster. So, in other words, the TLDR of everything that I just said, if you draft your QB1 within the first 7 rounds, you might be good sticking with just 2 quarterbacks in your entire draft. But if you draft your QB1 in round 8 or later, you're going to want to draft a 3rd quarterback and hope he turns into Brock Purdy, not Brock Osweiler. Now, is it that simple? Is it that simple to create that line in the sand and say QB1 within the first 7, stick with 2, QB1 after 8, go with 3? Of course, it's not that simple. Where you draft your second quarterback matters just as much as where you drafted your first quarterback. But I do have to keep some things for paying Basement Brood Fantasy Football subscribers. I'm going to go ahead and save that information for paid BBFF members that are supporting my childhood dream. Of course, you're always welcome to join us. You're always welcome to join the Basement Brood Fantasy Football family. Just visit wap.com/BBFF. And last but not least, let's wrap this thing up with one other classic debate, and that's, should you draft 2 or 3 tight ends in a 2025 best ball draft? The truth is, over the last 3 seasons, just 18% of the top 300 teams rolled with just 2 tight ends after their 20-round draft was complete. And of those teams, a big chunk of those teams drafted a tight end in the very first round. Think about Travis Kelce over the last few seasons. But the truth is, once you get past round 4, if you're drafting your first tight end after round 4, the majority of winners in this 300-team data set went with 3 tight ends total. And that makes sense inherently when you think about it, right? If you're drafting a guy like Travis Kelce in the first round, at least historically, that means you're banking on his floor, you're banking on his ceiling. There's no need for a second or third tight end as you're spending that expensive of a draft pick on your tight end. But once you get past those elite options, you're going to want to lean on a second and third option to carry you. So, what's the rule? The rule, at least for 2025, is unless you land an elite, a truly elite tight end, and this year that's Brock Bowers and Trey McBride, then you're going to build your best ball rosters with 3 tight ends after 20 rounds. And of course, the trick with landing Brock Bowers or Trey McBride, of course, is that they're going to cost you your second round pick. And there is a real, very real opportunity cost to drafting those guys instead of drafting a wide receiver or a running back, as teams that draft a tight end within the first 2 rounds make up less than 12% of the top 300 teams over the last 3 years. Personally, I am fading Brock Bowers, I'm fading Trey McBride in round 2, and instead I'm hammering Travis Kelce in round 8, Mark Andrews in round 9, or Evan Ingram in round 10. All right, that's the high-level breakdown of the top 300 best ball teams over the last 3 years over on drafters.com. We will be unpacking each of these even deeper in the upcoming future episodes, so go ahead and smash that subscribe button like you just found Tyreek Hill in the 4th round. No, seriously, I just did that today. It was awesome. And remember, if you want to draft with me in a private, listeners-only best ball contest, smash the link that we left for you in the show notes and enter promo code BBFF for a 100% match on your deposit. And when you do, send me an email to let me know, and I'll wipe $10 off your annual subscription to my small but mighty business, Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. Don't worry, I left my email for you in the show notes below as well. Other than that, give this video the old thumbs up, drop your questions in the comments below, and smash that old subscribe button. I'll see you on the fantasy football field. Cheers. This brew's for you.